Time now for Focus, and today we're heading to Colombia's main Pacific port, Buenaventura. It's been called one of South America's most violent cities, and it's an important exit point for cocaine and other drugs heading up the Pacific coast towards the US. But there have been clear improvements since security forces were sent in last year to patrol the streets, and President Juan Manuel Santos ordered an emergency infusion of cash. Some locals even taking security into their own hands. Fernand van Tetz reports.
In Buenaventura, they call it the Road of Peace. It's like an oasis at the heart of a city engulfed by violence.
As you can see, we live peacefully here. This woman can sell her fish. People can play dominoes.
It was a little more than a year ago that the residents of Puente Nairo, tired of being at the mercy of armed gangs, decided to proclaim their neighborhood a humanitarian space. The violence had reached insane levels.
Over there, where the dog's lying down, is the place we call the slaughterhouse. A lot of people were killed in there. We could all imagine what was going on inside because of the screams we heard. The killers would dismember people while they were still alive.
Assassinations, extortion. The terror lasted for months until the community rebelled. One day in April of 2014, it decided to expel the armed gangs from the neighborhood.
We first began by reaching out to them. We told them they couldn't come here anymore. It was hard at first. They threatened to kill us. They continued to come and go as they pleased. So we decided to build this gate at the entrance of our neighborhood.
Over 1,000 people live behind this gate, which is more symbolic than anything else. At the entrance, authorities have stationed 2 police officers, but the inhabitants have also erected defences of their own.
As you can see, we've closed off access here. We know it's not very secure, but this way they can tell. We don't want them to enter.
This neighborhood lives in poverty with no running water or sewers, but it's in demand due to its access to the Pacific coast, ideal for fishing, business, and for criminal gangs, perfect to smuggle cocaine out of the country. 2 criminal gangs have been fighting for control of these shores. They emerged from paramilitary groups that were dismantled 10 years ago.
Buenaventura is an example of the political failure to dismantle paramilitary structures in Colombia. Areas that are economically strategic for our country are yet again being controlled by these groups, which were never completely demobilized.
The Justice and Peace Commission leads initiatives of civil resistance throughout the country.
In our experience, one of the factors that helps most to deter armed groups and make them respect the lives of civilians is an international presence.
The presence of foreign humanitarians and the steadfastness of inhabitants have borne fruit. There hasn't been one homicide in a year, and peace has returned to the neighborhood.
He's my son. I now let him leave the house. I feel at ease. He can play with the other children. Before that was impossible.
Yet as peace is restored, human rights defenders warn a new threat is on the horizon.
That's where work will start to build a touristic boardwalk and pier around the city. It will mean the forced displacement of all the communities that live in the stilt houses on the ocean shore.
After winning against the gangs, this Colombian slum prepares to face a new foe: developers.
Joining me now from London is Antonio Sampaio. He's a research associate for Security and Development at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Hello, thanks very much indeed for your time. Now, I'd like to start off by talking about security in Buenaventura. We just broadcast a report on a peaceful community, Puente Nairo, but how much has the situation improved in the city as a whole since the government decided to intervene last year?
Well, the situation has improved. Of course, the civil society and international humanitarian groups and the government disagree on how much it has improved, but definitely the homicides have fallen since last year and since 2013. However, it is pretty clear that the so-called slaughterhouses or chopping houses, which is a particularly unfortunate and brutal manifestation of criminal violence in Colombia, has continued in Buenaventura. There are some press reports, and Human Rights Watch, for instance, has reported that it has continued since the government intervened. So the help offered by the government or sent by the government in terms of over 2,000 military and police forces, some investment is definitely an improvement from the past in which the city had been basically abandoned by the federal government in many ways. But it is not at the proportion that perhaps is needed to completely curb this criminality there.
But can the government afford to keep this up? I mean, what happens if extra police are sent away? Will the improvements we've seen in Buenaventura be short-lived?
Well, the government has sent a little over 2,000 police and military forces, which for Colombia is not a lot, given that it has a strong and still large armed forces due to the conflict with the FARC. So in a large measure, I think the answer to this question is whether the peace process with the FARC will bear fruit and will result in, a significant decrease in violence overall in the country, which would allow the government to divert more resources to Buenaventura and to the criminal problem of the country, which has been a little bit overlooked in the past in comparison to the guerrilla problem.
Now, our report that we were broadcasting just before this interview ends by saying that locals face a new foe, developers, but the investment we're seeing to expand Buenaventura's busy port could have a positive economic and social impact on the area, couldn't it?
Yes, development works are definitely necessary for Buenaventura. It is part of the government programs that were announced last year to help the city to improve the poor areas of the country, like the community that was reported just now. However, it has to be done, of course, in a careful way. We've seen that development works that intend to have a very large-scale impact in a short amount of time tend to be very interventionist in communities and result in dislocations of people. But economic development infrastructure is absolutely essential for the city and for any city that faces criminal violence like Buenaventura. So it is all a measure of how you do that and how you do that taking care about human rights.
Are there many other cities in Colombia like Buenaventura where in some way you could say it's two Colombias colliding, the elite, so to speak, getting rich off international trade in the case of this particular city, and the poor?
Well, Colombia is an interesting case of the rural areas where there's still a large-scale insurgency going on, although, of course, the peace process has significantly reduced the violence, but the FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, are still pretty large, with, around 7,000 guerrilla fighters plus the National Liberation Army. They tend to be concentrated at the rural areas. And of course, there is a problem of lack of state presence throughout the rural areas of Colombia that allow this guerrilla threat to dominate. But in urban areas, we see an increasing trend towards criminal violence as a result of the demobilization of the right-wing paramilitary groups. That was another type of political violence during the 90s, during part of the 80s, that were demobilized 10 years ago and resulting in this highly criminalized and highly militarized threat of criminal groups attacking with tactics of a guerrilla group or a paramilitary group with heavy weaponry. So Buenaventura is a very intense, very extreme case. I don't think other cities in Colombia face the same threat, but it's definitely something that the government and the local authorities have to take care.
What about residents who say that the violence is actually deliberate, or at least not discouraged to a certain extent, so that people might leave port facilities and waterfront tourist attractions? Do they have a point? It
is difficult to say, given that I think it is a very serious accusation, but I don't have any evidence to support this. But I mean, there is a historical problem of perhaps a lack of state presence in some urban areas affected by violence. It's not just in Buenaventura, it's not just in Colombia, and it's not just in that region. I mean, the problem of very large cities that grew very rapidly and in a very chaotic manner, but at the same time are connected through global trade, which is the case of Buenaventura. So you have these two global trends clashing. On one hand, there is the increasing global trade bringing illicit goods, drugs, minerals, and on the other hand, you have a very chaotic city in which it's very difficult to implement policing effectively, in which the government has a historic, absence in many ways. So it is very difficult to take care of this problem. So a significant increase in the government presence needed.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, though, Antonio Sampaio, for joining us from London for Focus.